Right now, somewhere, a company is making a move in plain sight. The street reads the headline. Autonomy AI sees the signal. We deliver it before the market catches up. Autonomy AI. Your models, our intelligence. Request a private strategic briefing at AUTNMY.ai.
Martin, you and the team at Bank of America Global Research continue to publish really great primers, really great papers, really great insights. And I got to tout it, you do really great webinars. You did one recently on humanoids as physical AI takes off, and you published a wonderful primer. AI has left the chat. Yes, it has. It's physical AI. And Jensen's out there saying it's the era of physical AI. We saw it in the earnings. What did you uncover when you built that primer?
Well, we had a lot of fun, Grayson. Thanks for having me back, and good to see you. And obviously, when you and I were walking the halls at CES a few weeks ago, I think you'll have seen as well that everyone was talking about physical AI, not just NVIDIA, but I think probably half the meetings that we had were talking around physical AI, and it certainly captured the energy around the topic. So our report essentially is set to answer, is that true, and why now, right? What's behind this? And we found that AI has quite literally left the chat. So we're moving from digital text-based intelligence to AI systems that can see and act in the real world, or AI moving from screens to machines is another punchline that we used on the front page. So I think the context here, this isn't just ChatGPT with arms, right? Physical AI is powered by world models that understand space and physics. Machines don't just react, they plan, predict, and improve. So the question around why now, we're seeing, well, beyond better AI models, that story is certainly continuing. The key differentiator now, I think, is simulation and synthetic data. Robots can learn, NVIDIA said, 1,600 times faster with simulation than in the real world. And so they can fail safely millions of times before they enter the real world. So that's one of the key unlocks. The other thing that I know you've covered a lot on the podcast is rather than rules-based programmable software, end-to-end AI is starting to give that embodied intelligence that you can use across machines, right? It could be a car, could be a drone, could be a robot, and it continuously learns. So that's the key unlock. And capital was noticed, right? We've seen $41 billion now that went into physical AI last year. And we've seen about a tenfold increase in world model investments versus just 5 years ago. So the moat no longer might be just the smartest algorithm and the digital applications. We think is shifting a bit to who controls the full stack: hardware, data, simulation, and deployment at scale. And nowhere's that clearer than mobility, of course, as I'm sure we'll discuss today.
Wow, so you think it's going full stack, because that raises the question. When we walked around the central hall at CES, I noticed a trend. Yes, humanoids are everywhere, but you and I look past the, you want to call it the bright, shiny object, and looking down to it. I noticed dexterity, the hand movement. All of these various different companies are trying to show hand movement. You had one company showing that one robot could deal cards. You had another company showing, which I thought was great, it could hand you a glass of wine. I said, okay, all these different dexterities. So you saw, if you want to call trends there, and now you're saying vertical integration, which is really interesting because just this week you had ARM come out, talk very much publicly about that. You've had Snapdragon, Renee's been around, going around with Qualcomm talking about that. It seems that the chip manufacturers are trying to get a bigger piece of the pie here as well.
I think so. I mean, you saw some of that at CES and more recently. I mean, if you take a step back a bit, I think all of what we're seeing at the moment is that this whole notion of a shared physical AI infrastructure can benefit many of these partners, right? It's no longer that you're just going to have to spend money on developing an autonomous vehicle stack or robot or whatever, but equally the hardware is becoming central to that story. You're seeing it a bit in automotive. I think you'll start to see that a bit in robotics as well. And as you say, at CES, whether it's Qualcomm, ARM, NVIDIA, Ambarella, all of them made some kind of launch and new product announcement targeting physical AI. So I think this is going to become more central to both the hardware companies as well as some of the platform companies that can embed these technologies. And also, as I say, share that infrastructure across a number of different form factors.
Do you think over time that the conversation is going to shift from autonomous driving developer, humanoid developer, autonomous trucking developer to physical AI brain developers? And then if you want to say modeling those brains just for certain activities, or forking them, if you want to use the technical term?
I think so. I mean, it's starting to get a lot more interesting now. And that was one of the most fascinating parts of what's happening in the whole physical AI domain at the moment, is that, you know, the different branches of autonomy, whether it's across robots, vehicles, drones, industrial machines, etc., are no longer being developed in isolation. And, all starting to share this underlying AI stack. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect for everything, but a few years ago, every sector was building its own bespoke autonomy solution, and that was slow, expensive, and everyone would have a different ideology, right? As you know better than most. So as we're starting to see this more unified physical AI ecosystem, I think the overlap's happening at 3 levels that we wrote about in the report. The first is the shared AI models, right? So now we've got far more capable and even open source models across vision language models for perception, vision language action models for behavior, and of course, world models for physics, prediction, and planning. So being able to utilize these models or generalize them across domains means that the same set of underlying models could enable, as you said, a humanoid to pick up a glass or a car to navigate a junction or something that you would have previously seen as alien. So seeing this kind of embodied decision making under uncertainty is the first unlock. I think one thing that, as I mentioned just now, around simulation and synthetic data, lots of investors have been asking about this, and it feels that this could be one of the biggest accelerators. Why now? Because you're seeing much more capable digital twin simulation software, and of course simulators that can be reused across industries, whether it's NVIDIA's Isaac, Wabi World, I know you've had on the podcast, broader approaches to training humanoids, autonomous vehicles, industrial robots, and more, all using that same kind of virtual environments and world modeling systems. And as I said, just 1 second of utilizing these next-gen simulators would have taken 27 minutes of real-world testing and training beforehand. And that's what used to cost a lot of these companies billions of dollars for fleets and human operators and testing. Doesn't mean all of that can be done in simulation, but it can really speed up the development. And then, of course, the time and capital savings come with it. And then finally, it's the shared compute, right? The hardware and architecture shifts that are being made across car companies, robot developers, and as you said, the AI chip developers at CES in particular. You've seen that across all the announcements, but also the sensor stack as well, actually. I think, we've had a lot of debates about do you need LiDAR, but also the camera, radar, and all the equipment that's needed to enable this. But actually, you've seen several more examples of how and where these sensors can be deployed, and the cost is falling dramatically, right? So the cost of sensors is one thing. The centralized compute architectures that underpin both autonomous vehicles and even robots are starting to become more commonplace. And that's why you've got, developers that want to utilize the same robot brain, as you put it, whether it's in a humanoid or a robot dog or an autonomous car or an industrial robot. So that's, I guess, this shift really that you've talked about before of autonomous everything, right? Anything that moves could be going autonomous at some point, different maybe stages of commercialization. But I think this physical AI infrastructure is going to be one of the key enablers and unlocks here.
It is. And if you go on Hugging Face or you go on GitHub, you notice some interesting things. NVIDIA has open sourced a physical AI model. Google DeepMind has open sourced a physical AI model. And when I say open source, I want to clarify for the audience, non-commercial use. With NVIDIA, you have to use their chips. So there are rules that go around with the quote unquote open source, but you have the ability from a lab perspective to train. I think a lot about this space, and a company that, in my opinion, is not discussed enough. It's had incredible technical breakthroughs throughout history, not just recently, but what they're coming out recently has been fascinating. Boston Dynamics, well ahead, owned by Hyundai, making the Robotaxis for Waymo and AV, right? But Boston Dynamics is a fascinating company. Here's a hypothetical. What if Boston Dynamics said, you know what? We're going to pull a Zuckerberg. We're going to open source the BDOS, Boston Dynamics OS, and we're going to make our own version of the Maverick Llama model, and we're going to open source it. Does that all suddenly accelerate just because of their pedigree and heritage and how good the technology is being built for robotics at Boston Dynamics?
Well, you might see some of the better known robotics labs, Boston Dynamics being one of them, that start to give access to their models. But if you put yourself in the shoes of some of the developers of humanoids or AV stacks and even OEMs now, the choices that they have of these models is now far more extensive, right? Beforehand, you'd see maybe a partnership with one company, right? Obviously, Hyundai decided to acquire Boston Dynamics. You've seen also partnerships from car companies into humanoid robot developers and even with NVIDIA and for autonomous vehicle chips and models. But now I think you see a range of these different open source models giving them choice, right? And the faster they accelerate the development means that those developing, whether it's humanoids or other applications, have a choice now rather than just needing to partner with one potentially. So I think that's one thing that is accelerating. But to your point around some of the commercial partnerships here, what I found interesting, and certainly at CES with the demos that you saw from Hyundai and Boston Dynamics, the announcements around actually utilizing them to build cars in 2028 and some assembly tasks, you're starting to see the first commercial applications for not just industrial and warehouses now, but actually into assembly, right? Automotive being the first, but even Airbus are using humanoids, at least in testing, for some assembly tasks in aircraft. So I think there is going to become a bit more of a strategic moat in the long term of deciding these companies whether they need to vertically integrate, manufacture themselves, and who they will partner with. But to your point, there is also a huge layer of intelligence that could become more valuable to third parties, and whether they choose to buy that, license it, it becomes more inherently scalable. Whether it's companies using Boston Dynamics or NVIDIA, whoever, the models that are going to become available to will accelerate the development for humanoid integrators.
And think about it from a hedge fund perspective. There's been how many? I could probably give you 100,000 public documentations around a hedge fund buying satellite data to count mall traffic for if a store is doing well, or counting cars. And that data is valuable. All suddenly they start licensing that data, where we're seeing an uptick in productivity, say plant A and plant B. That's an interesting sign that goes into those models. And so that, if you want to say, could potentially be another revenue stream that could spit off gas for these companies.
Well, I think there's going to be lots of different areas companies want to monetize this data and intelligence and real-time information from. We didn't go into too much of that specifically in the report, but what we did look at is, how on the one hand you're seeing different partnerships emerge across humanoids, autonomy, autonomous vehicles specifically, and on the hardware side, what's going to be needed here. How they choose to monetize that, I think it's going to come down to a game of whether it's purely licensing that, whether it's vertically integrating some of those tools and who you partner with to achieve it. But in terms of the actual customer base, it's not just heavy industrial. You mentioned hedge funds. It could be any sector that could be utilizing some of these physical AI applications in the future, and even consumer ones. Right? You saw. I think this will take longer, but you've seen a number of the humanoids in the household type of debate. That I think you had LG and One X and a few other developers at CES showing, and even Tesla have talked about that, right? I think that will take longer to achieve, but even in the consumer domains, you're seeing, and retail, you're seeing a number of different robotics applications that would have previously seen as moonshot 20, 30, 40 years away. Now, because of all these technologies converging, you are seeing that kind of ChatGPT moment for robotics emerge.
It's wonderful. I remember years ago when I visited the Carnegie Mellon Robotics Lab, I was like a kid in a candy store. I was like, oh, okay, those are just the robotics guys. And now all of a sudden they're the cool guys on campus. It's amazing how these trends go. So then, do you see, basically, if you want to call it physical AI, let's just stay on the humanoid thing here, the robotics theme, getting specialized where, give you an example, if you're in the grocery store, you have a robot that can stock the shelves, that's a really good opportunity, or unload. And then you have a robot that can do medical, such as the Da Vinci robot, which has worked on over 20 million patients. And I spoke to a doctor in depth about this, and he actually said the recovery time is much better because the way that the robot does it versus a human. He said he prefers to have surgeries done with the Da Vinci robot. So that was a big sign. And then in the household, I learned a lot is that there's two major problems. You want to use the term edge cases that the humanoid companies have not figured out yet. And so we're going back and forth with my friend. I said, what is it? He goes, dogs and children. And I said, why? He goes, both unpredictable, low to the ground and unpredictable. And we haven't figured out how to sense for that yet. So that was really interesting.
I think we don't yet have the regulation for some of these products to be utilized in the consumer application and even in industrial, actually, right? So in terms of the pace or speed of adoption, compared to, we get asked a lot, what's the difference between maybe the ChatGPT moment and digital applications of Gen AI versus what we've written about now in the physical AI primer. And of course, it will be the speed of adoption and how quickly these become pervasive across those areas. But to your question, I think we will see some segmentation of these products across different form factors, right? Warehouse, industrial, automotive are quite maybe the early ones, but whether it's in medical or consumer or in areas that you've just outlined, I think that's going to become more around. They will be optimized for precision, safety, and regulatory certainty, but it doesn't mean that we're all going to need humanoids for that type of form factor, right? Over time, you think, you might have humanoids optimized for factories or retail logistics, just like cars ended up split into sedans and SUVs, etc., right? But we're not there yet. I think today is about building the platform and the infrastructure needed for these things. And specialization will come once, we have more reliability, regulations of how and where they could be used to avoid, as you say, catastrophes falling on, whether it's people in the house or safety and even breaking other things. But also, finally, the cost maturity as well. We've written about that in the report. You have seen, because of not just the AI model improvements, more the hardware costs coming down with scale, that there is big overlaps between the humanoid supply chain and automotive, more than I originally thought, at least. And to your point about robotics now being the cool kids, you've got the intelligence needed to bring robots to market is one thing, but actually to bring that to the manufacturability at scale is completely different from a research lab to millions or even billions of humanoids in the long term. So I think we will see more overlaps with automotive and the more industrial capabilities and just the scale of production that's going to be needed here.
As the humanoid scale, another issue they still have to overcome is the weight issue. A friend at a major logistics firm that has kicked the tires and tested these things, and he's telling me the amount of weight that a humanoid can carry dramatically varies. And you're right on the policy, and I'll have to give a pitch here. If you're listening or watching this podcast and you work on humanoid policy, please reach out to me. I really want to do an in-depth episode on humanoid policy. End of pitch. Back to conversation. But you're right, though. So you have all of these things that have to be overcome. That's going to go. But then from your perspective, we this historically. Automotive, a new part starts very expensive, and over time, it goes down. How fast do you see the cost, the parts for humanoids decreasing over time as this technology scales?
So, a couple of things, and maybe just what your previous point about safety and regulations. We've had a couple of demos in the office of humanoids. Two now at our conferences. Most recently in November, we had the startup Humanoid that you might have seen at CES with Scheffler, that were doing a demonstration of how their robot works. But I guess what we're starting to see is you can cordon off areas where these robots can be used, even without regulations and safety standards for working alongside other humans. Meaning, if your robot's being deployed to pick up boxes and move it from left to right, or on an automotive assembly line, or do different, you can separate humanoids and humans to have them working in parallel. So anyway, I think that it's not to say we need regulations before they can be commercially useful, which is actually slightly different to what we see in autonomy, right? Where unless autonomous vehicles can work on the road, then you've got some off-road applications, but the big unlock will be on-road. So anyway, that's one quick thing. The other thing on cost is, and what many of the robot developers have told us is, you're still talking $90,000 to $100,000 per unit that a humanoid costs, but we're still in very, peanuts in terms of relative scale so far. There was 20,000 humanoids that were manufactured last year, 80,000 of which were in China. 80% of which were in China. Our China industrials team think this could really grow exponentially now to about 1.2 million by 2030 and 10 million by 2035. And so the reason for that is that, given you've got a lot of the supply chain in place, the cost of that 90 to 100,000 of a made in China humanoid robot, they believe was 35,000 last year and could drop to about 17, 18 by 2030. So huge reductions already underway, and that brings some of the relative scale. And even in the US and here in Europe, companies are talking of I hosted Scheffler on a call a couple of weeks ago, as I think you joined, and they were talking about a 30 to 40,000 euro BOM cost. So let's say that the cost is going to be somewhere between probably 20 and 50,000, depending on the region, the parts, the functionality. Basically half of what we're seeing from some of the companies talking about this today. Now, if you want something that's more of a entertainment, hospitality, say what the Unitary robots were doing at CES, and dancing, backflips, and showcase of for I guess shock and awe tactics and what the fun parts could be. That's that that doesn't need to be the same as lifting boxes around in a warehouse or helping to build a BMW, right? So I think that will also start to bring some segmentation. But to answer your question, already seeing a dramatic cost reduction because of bigger scale, overlaps with the automotive supply chain, and bringing some of the overlaps with batteries, AI chips, sensors, etc., that are all getting cheaper, of course.
Over time, do you see, if you want to call it a centralized chassis or platform for humanoids, emerging where a developer builds on top of that platform or that chassis for depending on the different type of applications they want?
I think in some ways you're starting to see that in at least smaller scale, right? So you see the the private robot developers that are, the Agility Robotics and Figures of the world, even Tesla with Optimus to a certain extent, they're all kind of settling on a certain design of what the robots should look like, and what type of use cases they could be deployed for, right? So part of that is in the weight, as you say, how much they're able to lift. Part of that is in the type of sensors that they can use, but even the hands. I know you mentioned earlier dexterity, right? You're seeing that there's this kind of race to improve the degrees of freedom that humanoids can achieve. I think the Boston Dynamics one at CES was 56, if I'm not mistaken, and most of them are 20 to 40 on average. So increasing the kind of degrees of freedom that the robots can have can increase the usability, but not every robot needs to have that, right? And to the point where some of them are not even using hands or robotic hands with fingers. They're just using grippers because they're only moving a certain part or box, which could then bring the product to market a bit quicker and certainly cheaper than having to be as dexterous and functional as what you're seeing with some of the next gen humanoids that are coming to market. So I think, like anything, over time, where you'll see already the initial platforms being built in terms of how the robots look like and use cases that can be deployed. But you will see some functional differences in either the hands and grippers, even whether the robots are bipedal or not and use legs. I mean, some of them, like the demo we had in our office, was on a wheeled-based platform because it's cheaper and easier to move that around, and you can have more batteries in the base of the robot, and it brings more stability. Those that are using legs, of course, have to utilize quite a lot of energy to allow them to stand up in the first place, obviously then they have to have different weight characteristics of how much they can actually handle. So all these things are improving over time, but it's not to say that there'll be just one design that is the winning one here. I think you're seeing a number of different players emerging to, I guess, focus on different use cases. But bottom line, to your point, Grayson, I think for companies to have a scalable platform and, work with partners, ultimately, initially they're focusing on the design that would work internally, certainly in the automotive examples in Tesla and Hyundai and others that want them to be utilized in automotive manufacturing. To then go beyond that to multitasking and multi-purpose activities, you're probably going to see a much more bifurcation of both the size, weight, cost, dexterity, and all these different features that are starting to emerge.
Then things get very, very interesting when you give the humanoid autonomy within a certain ODD, if you want to call it, or robot operating area. That gets interesting to say, okay, your job, just this is hypothetical, your job is to keep the house clean. No dust, no mess. And it'd be really interesting to see over time how it learns your dining patterns. It gets very, very interesting. And then that's going to raise the whole issue that your team does a really good job of covering is cybersecurity, is that if you're having this as house and it knows, okay, Martyn has dinner at 6 p.m. Martyn goes to bed at 9. Okay, there's a pattern there. The cybersecurity element is something that still has to be overcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously once we get into that type of situation, I think there's benefits and risks here, right? You could look at that through a negative lens of, right, we've got a lot of risk associated of who utilizes that data and what the negative consequence of that might be. But equally on the positive, if there's something that can, whether it's in a humanoid form or we're starting to see this as well even in autonomous vehicles as well, right? Remembering patterns of where you've been to, why and when you went, and integrating that into the navigation of the vehicles. So I think over time there is a lot of opportunities and risks emerging here. You can see how, I guess, already the more sensitive use cases of how that information is going to be used and who can be in control of that is going to raise some questions. For us, though, I think the short-term opportunity and unlock is definitely in areas where you've got data that can be controlled by maybe it's industrial partners or B2B enterprise applications where this data can be managed in a proprietary and confidential manner. As it goes into more public applications, then, as you say, it's risky from both a liability standpoint, who uses the data, what's going to be used for, etc. But I think we're going to be some way until we see some of those risks emerging. Also, what some of the insurance implications are going to be. I know you've covered this a lot from an autonomy standpoint, but we don't really see much evidence yet of how this is going to play out in humanoids in the public domain. And obviously industrial ones are maybe easier to manage in the shorter term.
It's funny. It's just a matter of time until the special interest groups that are attacking autonomous trucks and autonomous vehicles start attacking humanoids. It's a matter of time until it gets on its radar. It's like, okay, it's whack-a-mole. One, next. When do you think that we will start to see autonomous driving, autonomous trucking companies enter the humanoid space? Because it seems that everybody's looking for, okay, we made the car drive, we got the infrastructure figured out. What's next? It just seems that something in my intuition tells me something's happening, and you've seen AI frontier labs have publicly spoken about it.
Yeah, it feels like you've got some of that starting to emerge now, right? And I think it's on the one hand, it's some of the companies that are developing also. Well, best example recently has been Wabi, right? Where they said, right, we're going to have an autonomy stack for autonomous trucks. Could be then developed into robotaxis in their case, but they've also said it could be applied or utilized in other areas like drones or robots, etc. So I think we're probably closer to that moment than many people think. Is that we see a number of companies that are almost repositioning themselves to create this autonomy stack that could be used across different areas, not just in autonomy but in humanoids. And so I think we'll start to see a number of different players that are developing both areas. And obviously, you've got the notion of this. Automotive maybe is one of the areas where, with AI-defined vehicle platforms, the first signs of using centralized compute, end-to-end perception planning, and the foundation model brain, like we've discussed, you're already most of the way there to the software stack for humanoid robots, right? So several OEMs have already announced they want to do that. Tesla, XPeng, you mentioned Boston Dynamics, even with Hyundai, and a few Chinese players like Chery as well. So I think we're seeing several AV players move up the stack, so to speak. The whole notion of these end-to-end models, whether it's Wave, NVIDIA, Wabi, others, can also help to then bring some of the sensor costs down dramatically as well. And I think, bottom line is that even with Tesla, you're seeing a repurposing of the production lines for automotive towards Optimus and robotics, right? So it kind of shows you some of the overlaps that of where we're going to see both autos and humanoids. So long story short, I'd expect we're going to see more AV developers and certainly car companies that are going to enter into the humanoid space in the next 2 to 3 years. The lines are starting to blur really now between vehicle AI and robot AI, and potentially becoming similar platforms.
If you just look at that, you're based in the UK. When I saw you last year, I went for a ride with the team over at Wave, and they just recently raised 1.2 billion US Series D at an $8.6 billion valuation. The previous round they raised over $1 billion. So just simple math tells you they've got over 2 billion. Don't know what the burn rate is, but there's billions of dollars to build things. That could get interesting there.
Well, I think you look at all the companies that are starting to raise more money now, and we've written about this both in the autonomous vehicle primer when I saw you last year, Grayson, and more recently in this one. Capital's moving now from can autonomy work to who's going to own the AI brain that powers everything that moves, right? And I think it's the same shift that you see now in physical AI, is that this common infrastructure across cars, robots, drones, whatever, investors are now funding the companies that they think can build some of the foundation here, no longer looking at autonomy as a moonshot necessarily, but as a kind of inevitable platform shift. So whether it's the Wave or other companies that have, and many companies have announced funding in the last few weeks, I think what we're starting to see now is not maybe focusing on just robotaxi businesses or one or two specific parts of autonomy, but actually this whole move towards more embodied AI software layers that can run on any vehicle in the auto sense, and even up the stack towards robots and other things that we've discussed today. I think what's most interesting recently is the emergence of car companies, right? Certainly in the investment into Wave and many of the AV players recently, is that car companies for a long time have been kind of deciding whether they want to build their own autonomy stack or partner with AV players, as you know, and more recently are kind of going with some of the partnership approach, I think, rather than vertically integrating. But this is a kind of signal that car companies are reacting quickly to partner up with AV companies, Wave being one of them. And also the thing that you and I have discussed in the past, I think is interesting, is this shift towards also asset-heavy applications and fleet management, not just the notion of we need an AV player, an AV partner, but also what the commercial aspects are going to look like and how we're going to make this operational with charging and real estate and all those type of aspects.
I call it below the line, the unsexy part, because who's going to acquire the real estate? Who's going to manage the real estate? Who's going to put the charging infrastructure in there? Oh, who's going to wait in line for 2 years to get the charging infrastructure connected? Who's going to maintain it? So you have all of those elements, if you want to call it the unsexy part. So let's just do simple terms. That's the builders of the data centers, because without the data centers, you can't power the models. And so for autonomy, that's that layer. And I ask that because if you look where Wave is going and you look where the OEMs, they have Stellantis that invested in there, and Nissan and invested in there. Good hedge, by the way, to have not just one OEM because, oh, you'll work with them, we're not going to work with you. So good hedge on that. Do you see a potential where we have, say, an OpenAI, an Anthropic, a Google DeepMind, an XAI, where they become the operating systems for the foundation models that everybody else then builds on top? What we're seeing in the digital AI world, where people are building on top of those models. Do you see a scenario like that could possibly emerge, and are the OEM saying, "Hey, if this does, we just can't be left behind"?
Yeah, I know that's one of the theses you've talked about extensively on the podcast from memory, Grayson, and I do tend to agree that that's a way that it could shift over time, right? But as we alluded to, the model's shifting a little bit from autonomy being a software layer that OEMs buy rather than now a platform movement, and that rather than just partner with one of those companies, you're going to need a few things, right? Have the data you need to scale, redefine the vehicle architecture, the compute, and some of those things are starting to take place, but also have now available these embodied AI foundation models that can generalize across markets. And rather than have a different partner for, I don't know, a Mercedes S-Class versus a C-Class, you're going to need something that's a bit more scalable to be profitable across these different, even within car companies, but across different platforms as well. So I think, what we're starting to see now is that across these different form factors, you're seeing different partnerships emerge, but also, I guess, with a view towards scaling these autonomy platforms across individual car platforms and across the brands and partners, and not needs every car company to make the same investment, I think, long story short.
Because car companies are struggling, in my opinion. They made the big bet on EV. We saw the multi-billion-dollar write-downs that they've had on those, and that's on a balance sheet standpoint. And then on this standpoint is the consumer. The consumer wants a highly advanced version of ADAS, and I'll just say it point blank, they want FSD. A lot of consumers don't want a Tesla, but they want the FSD features, and you're seeing OEMs struggle to find that middle ground. Just this week, BMW canceled their L3 program, which was eyes off for the new 7 Series, went to an L2 Plus system. But the consumers is going to demand more than that. They're going to want more, and what Wave is building, what Neuro is building, could give those OEMs that. And that becomes a really interesting opportunity, because it seems to me, to say this very bluntly, the OEMs are in this pickle of this, and because they work on these 5 to 7 year cycles, and they're in the middle of this pickle. Which way do we go?
Well, I think at the moment you're right. Every car company is trying to have their own equivalent, whatever it's going to be called and branded. But ultimately, it's an ADAS product, right? Driver assistance, autopilot type of functionality that in the level SAE levels will be up to level 2, level 2 plus as it's currently called. And my personal view is, and we've written about this in the report a bit, is you've got a bit of a bifurcation happening between this ADAS and full autonomy. And I used to think that you wouldn't have level 4, but you'd have to have this gradual process where we'd have level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. But actually, the two are starting to coexist, as you know, right? And so in the automotive sense, you're having this, as you say, FSD from Tesla and many companies trying to replicate and have an alternative or something similar to that. But ultimately, you are going to be the fallback and expected to be in control, or at least able to take over if that system doesn't work in the short term. Maybe that will change in the long term. But for all intents and purposes for now, these are targeted as driver assistance features that are towards personally owned cars and drivers. On the other side, you've got kind of a number of different level 4 players emerging, some of those we've discussed already, in the overlaps with physical AI and robotics, etc. And actually, they're commercializing quicker than many people think, right? You've got 200 pilots of autonomous vehicles around the world now, and about 10 of those fully commercial. We'll probably see another 20 or so this year. So you're seeing now these two things starting to coexist. But then there's a question around level 3, right? For all the various reasons of level 3 systems in ADAS, at least, they're costly, they're quite niche, they're restricted by regulation. Customers, there's a question mark, are they willing to pay thousands of pounds for them that can only be deployed in a narrow set of conditions? As I say, I think you'll see a bit of a bifurcation between maybe lower levels of autonomy that can be approved and regulators are comfortable with that in the short term, versus at the other extreme, full autonomy or in defined or ODDs and areas where it's permitted, and then obviously that's a different commercial proposition. So for now, it feels like you've got level 3 question mark over timelines, probably still relevant in the mid to long term, but those two models are starting to become a bit bifurcated.
They are, and I believe truly over time, this goes back to when Sebastian Thrun was running the Google self-driving car project, where if you give a consumer a highly advanced L2 system, they're going to misbehave. You can look at all the nits of data that they're going to misbehave, and that's why he publicly stated that Google self-driving car project, now Waymo, went to L4. And when I speak with consumers and I interact with consumers, they want L4. They don't want to pay attention. They want to sleep. They want to go on their phone, whatever it might be. That's truly what they want. The consumer wants L4. The question is, the technology's been proven, it's been solved. Just look at Waymo. Waymo is one of the most impressive companies of the last 15 years. Truly impressed what they've done. Watch as those ODDs expand. All of a sudden, you go from a 60-mile ODD to, say, I'm going to give you a very big number, a 200, 300, 400-mile ODD. In that ODD, there was a very good scenario where a mom and a dad could live with a family, the grandparents could live in that ODD, the relatives live in an ODD, the school's there, they never have to drive. That gets interesting.
I think so, but equally, it's going to take some time, right? And I think whilst the availability of level 4 in both personally owned autonomy or even a fleet-based Waymo or whoever the partner is going to be and provider of that, I think the commercial value of that is clear. We wrote a bit about this in the report, this kind of 1.2 trillion autonomy market that's just on the hardware, let alone all the different business cases that could become on top of that. But I still think the personally owned AV or having a personally owned level 4 vehicle is going to take a bit longer for that type of geography, right, in that type of scale. You can see the value when it does, because anything, whether it's a 2-car household goes down to 1, or you could have shared one vehicle across the family. That changes the notion of car ownership. But I think it's easier to visualize, at least for us in the short term, what the ADAS models and the volumes you're seeing in that. Take an example in China. Our autos team there believe by 2030, which is not that long away, you're going to see more than 80% penetration or 84% penetration of level 2 ADAS functionality, but even 5% of level 4 functionality. So there is a kind of clear ramp in terms of scale now. But I think in terms of how comfortable each country and jurisdiction is going to be of level 4 for personal applications, we still need to see how that's going to play out. I think city by city is where we're seeing more of the level 4 interest and application, right? Whether it's in robotaxis, public transit, certainly here in Europe, we're seeing a lot of shuttles and testing being deployed that I think could be quite useful. So again, that's the first unlock. When it gets, as you said, bigger ODDs that enable not just within cities, but into cities, then of course you start to have huge opportunities there.
You have massive opportunities. It's almost that, if you want to call it, it's the L2 plus is the gateway or the trust factor to getting consumers to trust L4. You get comfortable with L2 on a highway or certain conditions, L4 becomes easier to trust. The one thing that I'm looking for in the market as a sign, a very big sign, what is Waymo doing with Toyota? We had that 1-sentence, 2-sentence press release last year. Something's going on. That to me is a big tell sign to watch, because Toyota, the largest manufacturer in the world, one of the world's greatest manufacturers. Obviously, yes, I know you have Tesla with the Cybercab, but in the US, you have all the NHTSA regulations that they still have not been approved for yet. The question is, Toyota and Waymo, where do you think that could potentially go? Because that was a very cryptic 2-sentence press release.
Well, sadly, we haven't seen any insight or public announcements on that since then, right? But I think what it does signal, both that announcement this week with Wave and the 3 OEMs that are investing in them, many of the different partnerships that car companies are setting up, Mercedes with Momenta and others. I think what it does show is that, on the one hand, you've got a number of autonomy players that can help bring these products to vehicles much quicker. But it's not clear as to whether that's going to be in personally owned vehicles, right? It's the expectation that is what would happen with Waymo and Toyota, given the nature of that announcement. But that could equally be in a level 2 system, right? No one knows yet. So I think how the services that are fully autonomous, level 4 and above, in areas where where you're not expected to be in charge of the vehicle at any point of time, that's going to have its commercial, or the rise of commercialization this year in particular. So you're starting to see dozens of cities being announced for many of those partners of where they intend to operate, but less clear on what those type of OEM partnerships will be. And you see, obviously, Waymo with Hyundai as well announcing, I think it was 50,000 vehicles. Lucid with Neuro and Uber that they've announced. So you're starting to see some clarity on the type of numbers of vehicles that could be relevant, but less in terms of the actual, whether it's a robotaxi and fleet-based operation, or that's going to start to spill into the personally owned. I know many people hope that it will, but I think the reality is in the short term, those, given the extra cost and sensitivity and regulation and also maintenance requirements and fleet management, that's probably, in my opinion at least, that's more likely to be in the fleet-based operations in cities to showcase this technology works before it trickles down into personally owned applications where, you know, you've not only got regulation and cost concerns, also customer acceptance and, you know, understanding where and when and how they can use the technology. So I think, you know, I'm certainly hoping that comes into the personally owned automotive domain at some point, but it feels like the fleet-based robotaxi and commercial applications are the test beds in, you know, in tier one cities initially, but also a number of other cities that are going to test this technology in the next year or two.
We're all hoping that it's going to come, and I'll just say very bluntly and give you a prediction: it will come at some point. I'm going to give you a timeline, but at some point you'll be able to own a personally owned autonomous vehicle, and you were 100% spot on about the fleet maintenance and the maintenance of this. So you, Martyn, your family, my family, we own a personal L4. Well, if the sensor has to get recalibrated, what happens? That's where I think the vehicle, this is hypothetical, the vehicle will have to autonomously drive back to a depot, get recalibrated, and come back. Or perhaps you have roving service technicians, as Tesla has today. But the fleet management infrastructure, if you wanted to just use the term, the plumbing of autonomy, is still not solved. It still has to be figured out. So while that's being figured out, we do a lot of coverage of that on Autonomy Markets, is the regulatory environment is getting a little bit clearer. You're based in London, and we saw an announcement from, I think it was the UK Transport Secretary, that they are going to move up the regulations potentially to allow the commercial operation of robotaxis. And then I read an article last week in the BBC. Waymo had a big kickoff party. There's photos on X of the Waymo Jags going around central London. I believe you even saw one out of your office. It's starting to scale globally, and it seems like regulators are getting more and more comfortable.
Yeah, and we wrote a bit about this in the report, how regulation used to be seen as the kind of the negative stick for autonomy, that why it may never happen, right? But I think things have changed a lot, partially because the technology's improved. You've got, you know, the commercial opportunity is huge. The labor shortages and driver shortages are considerable as well in a number of markets. And all these things combined, you know, mean that maybe some of the opinions are starting to shift a bit. And with that, given that technological readiness and the generalization of end-to-end AI in particular across markets at a faster pace, regulators are starting to maybe not fully change their opinion everywhere, but being more amenable to allowing these services to test in the first place and writing clearer regulations that the operators are going to need to abide by, right? So that's something that is maybe a slightly different situation than what we saw in the emergence of ride-hailing and other mobility services, for example. So I think Europe and certainly the UK, it's not just one or two players, actually. There's a number of companies that are starting to turn up here and see the global competition that's possible with autonomy. You had this kind of race of US and Chinese autonomous vehicle technology developers, but Europe and the Middle East are certainly the test beds of where these companies are going to be going head to head, right? London's got announcements from Waymo, from Wave, from Baidu, and a few others already. You know, Bolt, Oxa, many other companies that are starting to test services on the real on real roads. And you know, once you have this kind of regulatory framework and clear safety standards, then it signals, I guess, to the entire industry that Europe and certainly the UK is open for business in terms of autonomy, right? So, yeah, I think it's at early stages for sure, but you'd now, even in the last few months, you've had all these companies announce that they want to operate either within London or other cities across Europe and even into the Middle East as well. And I think every major AV developer is going to look to that as a strategic expansion opportunity. It might not be just in robotaxis, but also in some of the shuttle bus and public transit operations that we're starting to see. But I think, you know, the long story short, the combination of strong regulation, which some people viewed as negative, might actually be a positive for autonomy deployment, because you've got specific guardrails of when and how it can be deployed and what volumes and in what jurisdictions. You've also got the really diverse road conditions, meaning that in the old days of as companies call it AV 1.0, if you needed to redesign an autonomy stack for London, then Paris, then Berlin, then that doesn't scale much. You've got months and billions of dollars required to go one by one. Now, with the notion of generalizable AI, that could maybe be unlocked a bit quicker. And then finally is the whole kind of multimodal transit, right? You've got, it's not just Europe's cities in particular are not, many are car light and not car dependent. You've got cars integrated into well-utilized public transit systems, as you know, and autonomous vehicles could, if done correctly, complement that. So it does give some policymakers a few headaches as to, will this cause more congestion, or where should they operate? All those type of questions. But I think actually that will be a net positive for reducing private car ownership and usage, because it could be an additional opportunity to bring the cost down of probably ride-hail is one obvious example, but many other autonomous vehicle applications in public transport make the cost of travel cheaper across all these different form factors on the road.
The EU in general, with Navia based out of France, then they had Easy Mile. They were always big on shuttles historically. I remember in the early days when we first got in this industry, it was shuttles, Europe. And so Europe's had a thing for shuttles, and I'm not sure what the future of shuttles are, but I think there's an immense opportunity for Europe to deploy robotaxis, because I believe that for the UK and Europe, that robotaxis will become an economic driver. And if you look at London, if you're down by Parliament, and then you want to go to the Victoria and Albert, or you want to go to this museum, or you wanted to go to that museum, or you wanted to go on a historical thing because you have those really great plaques. So I went where Lawrence of Arabia lived. I went where James Doyle for Sherlock Holmes, and you could build these wonderful experiences inside of a Waymo, which is safe, which will create economic tourism for the UK and Europe. And that's a really good economic indicator, because let's be honest, the UK and European economies, they need the boost.
Well, I think what we are starting to see, and builds on your previous question, is that Europe and the UK, but Europe in particular as a whole, is becoming now highly competitive. Will become highly competitive for autonomy. You've got multiple players that want to service that and build experiences. To your point, and I think we're going to expect more companies to announce launches in the near future. How that looks like in terms of a tourism and those type of applications is remains to be seen. But you see, I think the first commercial launches in trucks, deliveries, robotaxis, and the point A to B mobility services are going to be the first to commercialize. I think you're always going to see the value that autonomy can bring in terms of the customization, the personalization, and building into existing subscription plans or travel plans and season tickets. All these things are certainly what the companies are starting to think of, right? And especially the companies developing autonomy. I guess that they're very much from the technology world rather than from an automotive world, where bundling of these services is a second nature. In terms of, maybe building in favorite services, points of interest, adverts, all those type of things are second nature to a lot of the tech companies. So it's not hard to visualize what the potential use cases and services will be. But I mean, for us, the short term, I think, is just what we're starting to track a little bit is how many cities have announced and what is the business model, right? Is it a robotaxi application? How many vehicles is it? And we are starting to see some proof points around that now, like number of vehicles on the road. And it could be up 400, 500,000 robotaxis just in the next few years alone, right? So we are seeing meaningful volumes starting to rise. But yeah, easy to see where some of the fun applications of this will come and make it more personalized and customized. And that's where people will be willing to pay more or less for that type of service, right? How you can make a better margin on some of this stuff will be if you make it more, there is a reason why people want to pay more for a certain class of vehicle than the cheapest, and that analogy will hold true, I think, in autonomy as well.
I think the UAE, I know the UAE is one of the most important markets globally for autonomy. And if you look at different levels of service, so you have in Dubai the Momentum Mercedes S500 that's running, and then you have the WeRide vans running over in Abu Dhabi. I could see a lot of interesting scenarios in the UAE. Let's just hone in on Abu Dhabi. If you go from Ferrari World to the Louvre, you can run in an AV and be part of that experience. It's all on Yas Island, all in that marina area. And then if you look into Dubai, the Jumeirah Beach region, you have these really interesting things where if you look at the way the UAE is designed, it's designed in pockets where you can move tourists around. And if you look at the growth of Dubai tourism, it's been pretty exceptional. You can move tourists around in these corridors with autonomy, have a great frictionless experience, and then they're going to spend more. And then the most important thing that these countries need, they're going to come back. And so that gets really interesting. And then from the AV standpoint, it gives them really great learnings of how people interact with the vehicles.
Yeah, I think that would be a viable use case. But what we will start to see as well is that the AVs are going to be deployed across bigger capacities, right? Whether I don't know if there's any examples of that on the UAE, but you see some of the shuttle buses being deployed already. And obviously, I know WeRide are operating over there. So on the one hand, you might have AV solutions for 1-2 person robotaxi applications, but you are starting to see that deployed across bigger capacity vehicles as well, which I think that's where you're going to need more of an unlock for bringing integrated multimodal transportation rather than just being either car dependent or car based or even shuttle based. So I think first things first, as the technology can generalize into all these new form factors and type and class of vehicles, that can make the technology more scalable and profitable as well. The point I was going to make on that, we had WeRide at our conference a few months back now, and we were looking at the different potential economics of robotaxis and shuttles by market. And one of the questions investors raised was, well, surely this is only going to be more relevant in the short term of areas where the driver is, the cost of labor and the driver is the most expensive part of the equation. But actually, they showed a number of different use cases where, given all these different the technology, hardware cost, the charging, fleet management, and other areas, that vehicles could still be profitable in China, India, and other areas where the cost of a driver might not be as high as it is in New York or London or Paris, but the profitability per vehicle is still high on a percentage margin basis. Even at an absolute level, is not as high as it might be in New York, London, etc. So I think we are starting to see now proof of where some of the economics can play out. And it's not just in the cities where the cost of a driver is the most expensive, put it that way.
I mean, there's massive opportunity on the robotaxi side, and there's also massive opportunity on the trucking side. You're seeing really great things come out of Bot Auto, come out of Kodiak, come out of Aurora. The common denominators are all scaling. Bot Auto announced this spring they're going driver out. That's going to be fascinating. Houston to Dallas, driver out, commercial loads for Ryan Transportation. Kodiak is operating 24/7 driver out in the Permian Basin. Aurora is planning to launch driver out service because of the attendant in requirement is going to go away because they're going to get a new vehicle. And then you're going to have 3 of the most important autonomous trucking companies by the middle of Q2 operating driver out. That's impressive. Do investors now, do you think, begin to look at autonomous trucking as an opportunity, or is it always this, nope, robotaxi? Are we finally starting to overcome that?
I think so. I think, autonomous trucking and commercial vehicles in general, not just trucks, actually. We think of delivery, vans and logistics, but certainly trucks is one of the more commercially compelling parts of autonomy and even the physical AI story, right? And unlike robotaxis, trucking's probably got clearer economics, right? Clearer operating domains, and very clear customer demand for what they need those services and trucks to do. So, and finally, you've got the acute driver shortages that I mentioned earlier on, right? About 4 million global truck driver shortages that I think the Truck Industry Association believes going to double by 2028. So it's attributed to a number of shortages and bottlenecks and rising costs. So I think the other thing is that highways could become one of the easier autonomy problems, right? Especially we've got straight line distances like the ones that you mentioned, Grayson. The routes are predictable, speeds could be steady, and the business case is considerable. So you've got, the clear demand and use case drivers commercially. There's actually a number of pilots now that are emerging. I think from the data we showed from Bloomberg, I think there were more than 90 autonomous trucking and logistics pilots that are available and operating now on real roads, and 7 of those nearing full commercialization. It looks like it's probably more next year that you'll see some of that in the commercial. So you've got a few this year, as you know, but 2027 seems to be the year that many of them are starting to have more driver out commercial operations. But as I say, 90 or so of those are operating on real worlds already. So I guess in general, autonomous trucking is further along than many people think. And already, whether it's the capital flows, regulatory openness, the maturity of some of these systems, and the partnerships between the AV companies and the truck OEMs, all those things are all in place. And it looks more of a kind of a when, not if, you'll see these services commercializing on the road, even if it's maybe another 12 months or so. And finally, actually, one thing that is the other thing that's interesting is when we talk about robotaxis or full autonomy, obviously that vehicle needs to be driven autonomously for the whole time. With the truck operations, some of the commercial ones are looking at hub and spoke applications or having human-driven trips from the depot to the highway and then or to a hub next to the highway and then drive autonomously for the highway part. So there's a few different business models there that are emerging that could be interesting.
The whole sector is interesting, and at least here in the United States, the hub of it's Texas. Texas is the hub of autonomous trucking. When do you think we're going to see autonomous trucking enter the UK? There's announcements. So Plus is looking at entering the EU market through Spain. But when do you think the UK and the EU market really starts to see significant traction on autonomous trucking?
I think it's hard to give you a timeline yet. I mean, there's not been an announcement as to exactly what the type of timelines will be. But like I said earlier, with regulation for robotaxis in Europe, you are seeing more, I guess, amenable to testing and pilots and early stage conversations, right? And Europe has two things that autonomy loves, right? Dense cross-border traffic routes and, of course, the driver shortages that we mentioned earlier on. So you've got a lot of freight volumes that are traveling across Europe that could be serviced here, perfectly suited for the hub-to-hub autonomy models that we just discussed. So I think you'll first start to see a foothold in some of the key industrial hubs, here in the UK, Germany, Netherlands, etc. Across all of Europe is going to be relevant. But what I'm less sure about what kind of scale and what timelines yet. Once you have the safety case proven and costs start to drop and you've got a few commercial operations, we'll then see maybe a bit more proof point. And also it might depend on, certainly for the pan-European operations, we'll need some kind of a pan-EU regulatory harmonization. At the moment, as you know, each member state has a kind of different agreements and policies as to how and where autonomous vehicles can operate, which are moving quite positively and quite quickly for robotaxis, but it's still not pan-European wide. So that's, to be confirmed, but I would have thought this is years, not decades now, right? Given the progress in the technology, certainly what the US companies are showcasing, and as I say, the clear commercial opportunity that this can bring.
It's a huge positive. There's no doubting it that physical AI scaling. Just look at drones. Drones can complete over 3 million deliveries globally. Zipline just raised 600 million, and we can't talk about physical AI without drones. What do you think of drones? How fast is that going to scale in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, so it's one that we kind of looked at towards the end of the report because, for two reasons. We think this is interesting, partially because of the technology improvements like we discussed earlier on, where the same type of tech stack could be deployed across a number of different form factors. But drones could become more of a quiet powerhouse of the autonomy economy, as you put it on your podcast, I think, right? You've got these 3 million commercial deliveries that have now taken place from the likes of Zipline, Amazon, Google with Wing, Flytrex, Manor, and others. And you see that not just the funding that's going into that. What makes drones more important, I think, is that you've got making all of this intelligence work in a much, much smaller vehicle or aircraft, in this case, on the edge. Having to make those decisions in real time means that once you can nail that into something as small as the drones that you're seeing, then that should theoretically be able to, or easier to scale that up into into cars, trucks, and the bigger objects that we've discussed already. So these constraints in drones could actually help to accelerate the whole physical AI ecosystem, is what we wrote a bit about. The same perception, planning, and world model architectures that you're going to need to power them could transfer into those different form factors. I think the three big roles we wrote about briefly and that will become more interesting here. First is for logistics, right? You mentioned it yourself, ultra fast, point-to-point delivery at a cost that human drivers couldn't match or wouldn't want to, and given the density of areas that they could cover. Then you're going to see, I think, more infrastructure and inspection. That's one of the key use cases drones are used for already, but it's with human operators, normally within line of sight. So having autonomous drones that can go beyond line of sight can allow much more inspection and infrastructure-related investments. And then maybe more for the, as I said, the mobility intelligence and utilizing this technology as an R&D front for the rest of the autonomy stack these companies are deploying. So I think it's becoming more of a critical layer, scaling faster than certainly I thought about when I looked at this a few years ago. And yeah, it's becoming a viable other autonomy category, I think.
It is, and the glue that connects all this is autonomy. Autonomy is scaling. Martyn, as we look to wrap, in your opinion, sir, what is the future of physical AI?
Hopefully a positive one. I think the future of physical AI, as we outline in this, is it's more where this intelligence becomes a layer in the real world, right? Not just software, but also like a physical intelligence layer. So we're moving towards a world where machines can see, reason, and act alongside us. Humanoids in factories, one example, right? Autonomous trucks on highways, robotaxis in our cities, drones in the sky, all powered by this kind of shared embodied AI models and infrastructure that learn continuously and improve as we get more data and information. So what that means economically is physical AI becomes software defined, and intelligence is I guess the new platform that these technologies can deploy here. And societally, I think that moves autonomy from a niche technology into more basic infrastructure, like electricity or the internet or any other thing that we take for granted. So all these things are starting to happen gradually, but if you see the combination of better compute, more data, better models, the falling cost of the hardware, and then bringing that into multi-different trillion-dollar opportunities across transport, industry, and more, I think that's where we're going to see a huge unlock here. So still early, but the direction's pretty clear. I think AI is moving from from words and digital applications to those in the real world, and we think that could start to shape much more interest, much more investment, and reshape a lot of things in the global economy going forward.
AI is going to reshape the world. Physical AI is the next embodiment of that, and it's all going to combine into what I've coined as the autonomy economy. The future is bright, the future is autonomous, the future is physical AI. Martyn, thanks again, as always, sir, so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thanks, Grayson. Good to be with you as always, and all the best for the road to autonomy.